Hey there YouTube, it's Geoffrey again. Today we're doing another creepypasta, but it's gonna be a lost episode creepypasta. And it's a Thomas and Friends creepypasta called James's Bad Day. Now I'm gonna read this creepypasta word for word. I know how most of you like summary style and how others like word for word, so I'm gonna do word for word. So let's not get into it and let's start. The popular children's television series Thomas and Friends was receiving good reviews when the third season aired in 1991. There was 26 episodes total. Thomas and Percy's Christmas Adventure was the final episode of the season, but there was a 27th episode that was written between Diesel Does It Again and Henry's Forest. The episode was titled James's Bad Day. The episode opened up with James, the Red Engine, pulling a goods train through the orchard. The opening sequence was the exact same as the episode No Joke for James. There was a couple of slight differences, however. The colors were a bit more duller, and James was going a bit slower than usual. The audio was a bit distorted, and narration can barely be made out. Michael Angelis and George Carlin, the British and American narrators, respectively, are talking in a very slow, monotone voice that is very hard to hear their voices. The next shot, however, is perfect, but James is now pulling an express train out of the station, looking rather sad as he had witnessed something horrific. There is no more narration at this point, and there is no more sound. The scene then fades black, and this is where the episode got strange. The next shot is at the sheds, and James looks extremely agitated. Gordon and Henry are also present. They begin laughing at James, but in a dark, demonic tone that doesn't sound anything like Michael Angelis and George Carlin. Gordon tells James that he wonders who would be next to be sent to the scrapyards. Henry then tells Gordon that James should be the next for being silly. At this point, the two narrators sounded their voices were clogged. Gordon and Henry have acted pompous and arrogant before, and sometimes insult their friends on the show, but this was something much more cruel and very dark for Gordon and Henry to say. The next shot is of James, and his eyes move but then lock onto the screen. He just stares at the viewer for 30 seconds and fades to a still image for about a frame. What I could make out, it looked like Thomas and Percy being thrown into a volcano. It looked absolutely horrific. It was there for about 2 seconds, and we can then see James going down a old abandoned line. James then begins to cry, and the shiny red paintwork begins to smear and turn dark crimson. This is where the episode turns with two extremely different versions from the US and UK. In the UK, James then comes across two small tank engines that look just like Thomas and Percy. In fact, it was them, but they were completely dented. Their funnels were cracked, and they didn't even have their faces. They looked like as if they were singed. James then begins to cry at first, but a faint whisper is heard, and James goes from crying to being still. His eyes then rolled over to me, and he smiled, and he said, "This will be your fate." Then he takes off down the line and begins laughing loud and demonic. A shot from the episode James Goes Buzz Buzz is seen when James' nose is red and his eyes spin, but the scene plays backwards and repeats itself for several times. James then passes by Gordon, who's simply laughing at what he thought of James' misfortune, and speeds along with the express laughing, extremely demonic, and tells James that there never was or will be any use for him or the two small tank engines. James then goes from laughing to grunting and growling. James then screams, and the sound is so piercing that I tried to turn down the volume on my remote, but it sounded as if James was in the room. James got across, and what appeared to be on his tender was a machine gun. A shot and blew up Gordon, who tried to dodge the bullets, and a loud explosion was heard. Obviously, feeling a bit guilty, James races down the line, goes down a narrow mountain track, where he flies down the mountainside, and eventually reaches the bottom. James instantly breaks in half and is completely mangled. The last scene shows a horrific shot of Thomas, James, and Percy completely disfigured. They don't have their faces. Thomas's tanks appear to have been bashed and his dome is missing. There's also a huge crack in his smoke box. Percy's wheels aren't even attached to him, and his cylinder is missing along with his connecting rods that are cracked. He's also missing his funnel and buffers, and James was the worst out of the three. It didn't even look like him. His coat was all rusted and his boiler was cracked in half. His tender had been broken apart, and he is also missing his front bogie wheel. His 6 driving wheels were just hanging from his running plate. Thomas and Percy also had blood stains all over their paint work. The scene pans out to show that Gordon, who somehow survived the explosion, and Henry laughing with devious Diesel. Edward, Duck, and Toby are present, and Diesel rolls alongside them and says, "You're next," in a very dark tone. The last scene is of Edward, Toby, and Duck looking horrified as if they know what was about to happen to them. The episode then fades to black for about a frame, then the normal end credits roll. In the US version, like the United Kingdom version, James goes along an old track. However, he ends up in a cemetery where he sees engine parts scattered all over the graves. James then hears a sound, a demonic laughter from one of the sightings, which sounds like Diesel 10 from Thomas and the Magic Railroad. He then hears Gordon and Henry say, "You're next," as he races off into the distance. James decides to hide into a siding and puffs up in front of a grave. James begins crying softly, but it sounds like an actual person crying, as if the narrator, George Carlin, was crying, with pain rather than acting. The next shot is of James's face. His eyes aren't even moving, and he's just staring at the gravestone. The scene then zooms into the gravestone. There is no name written on it, but it simply gives a time of death that says May 12, 1937 to June 22, 2008. This was actually the birth and death date of George Carlin, the American narrator. And yes, this is actually true. George Carlin did die on June 22nd, 2008. James then backs away from the stone and goes off to hide in the sheds. The next moment is of James spinning on the turntable, and Gordon is watching him and laughing at him. James backs down into his shed, and tears begin rolling down his eyes. James's eyes are just staring into the camera as if he is staring right into the viewer. This happens to be a shot from the first season episode Tenders and Turntables. The scene fades to black, and then there's a shot of Tim and Sheds abandoned with all the engines were rotting away. James is on the turntable still looking depressed and begins crying. The engines that appear to be scrap engines are Thomas, Percy, Edward, Toby, and Duck. The scene pans out to show Gordon and Henry laughing with Diesel. Gordon then speaks and calls James a small red engine in a demonic voice. And then the episode ends with normal, happy-go-lucky credits. After the credits, an image flashes on screen for a frame. The image shows the Toby model's face mask on a pile of wood. Afterwards, after watching the episode, I decided to play back some of the shots to me that happened that showed the strange differences in the characters' personalities. In the UK, James acted very aggressive and acted if he wanted everyone dead. It felt like he was talking to the viewer than being the regular, prissy, proud red engine that he usually tries to be. In the US version, James is acting very depressed, and I felt very uneasy on watching this version, seeing on how George Carlin was still alive by the time of the recording, who would then pass away 18 years later. I couldn't find any images surfing on the web, but I did make up the single image which would have been lost episode. As I went to sleep that night, I had a nightmare where I was in the episode. I was running away in my neighborhood, and James was able to jump off the tracks and chase me. He kept yelling at me, screaming, "You're not going to get away from me. I'm going to rip out your organs and feed them to the troublesome trucks." I must say, ever since then, I will never be able to look at James the Red Engine the same way again. Even when I'm walking through a store that sells Thomas merchandising, for example, Walmart, Target, etc., I feel like all the James toys are out to get me. One night I had another dream that my HO scale James from, either Bachman or Hornby came to life and tried to kill me. But it was only a small model, and I was able to destroy it. But as I woke up, I heard a tapping on my window. And I heard a train whistle that sounded just like James's on the show. I looked out, and there was James. He had his angry face, and his eyes moved up and down, and he rolled right up to my window and stared straight into my soul. So I ran upstairs thinking I found salvation until an army of James toys, like Hornby, Bachman, Trackmaster, Take and Play, etc., and Ertl, had freight cars of anthrax, and the real James said, "The next person who reads this article will find me in the room tonight. Restored." Wow, that was something. Now, I found this story really good, but there are some cliches like the blood and, feeding the reader's organs to troublesome trucks, which is not possible because trains only are able to go with water and coal in the steam universe, and diesels can only go with diesel oil. I mean, that's cliche as hell. Now, the thing about the gravestone, that is an actual death date of George Carlin. George Carlin was born on May 12, 1937 and died on June 22, 2008. And yes, when I heard that news, I was actually kind of a little upset because he was a pretty good Thomas actor. Anyways, I hope you liked my reading and which story you want me to read next. This is Geoffrey Sambursky, signing out.